6:03. I'll start with roll call. Jordan Tate.
Brianna LaRose.
Just Crowley.
John Flood.
Mark okay. And I
Kathy
guess,
Shaw.
Joe Wright.
Bill Sylvester, Tony Boyer.
Great, thank you. I think we might just skip over our other agenda topics and go right into the discussion about the mural ad hoc group committee. There's been a lot of work done. Want to catch us all up to speed and just jump right in?
well, basically, as we go, I think what the agenda was on 7A, and I think the forest group and the work group were really, all these areas were discussed previously. And essentially, the forest work group would essentially work in conjunction with the Bush and Auburn Forest Board if either the forest board might expand or it could be their own independent work group. But basically, at the present time, Forest Board essentially really does a super job in the downtown area, but it just doesn't, reach out to all the land on the outside. And so basically, if we really want the forests of Auburn to contribute to cleaner air, or carbon, clean water, a whole bunch of things, basically, all areas are really going to need the focus that essentially is of that divided community. And it's a similar thing with as far as the farm work group is concerned. The prior ad hoc committee essentially requested, I believe that would have been last spring or so, that they made the request to the council for an ag board.
I believe it was that.
And essentially the council hasn't acted, and so it seems wise to give them an opportunity to function and basically hopefully pick up where things are dropped, because essentially an ag group, work group, if they're going to work on anything, it really after harvest in the fall, before planting in the spring is when it's going to be done. And if we wait for the council, it isn't just because it's going to get done, period. I don't mean that critically, but, but just from a timing standpoint. And so the rationale for that essentially was to provide an opportunity, because there are a tremendous amount of issues, and essentially come up in the mayor's ad hoc advisory committee that there's no way you can attempt to answer a lot of those questions until there's a lot more study, because essentially that original study essentially provided a lot of information, but they really didn't have an opportunity to start the digestion process. And so I would assume that if the council should choose to go ahead, basically our group would pull back, but in the meantime, my feeling is they should have the opportunity to get to work.
And I would like to add too, if we had a forest workshop type subcommittee that was strictly for forest, we can also independently look at forest in the ag zone as well as private lands. Right now, the Lewis and Auburn Forest Board, I feel, does an amazing job, but with city resources only, which is such a limited small amount of forest law. So we're not capturing forests in Auburn. We're capturing trees.
The community forest.
The community tree, yeah, and the tree nursery and those types of things, which is such a limited. And I think that's part of, what we've discussed in the past, when we have a hard time.
Right.
Forests in general.
So would this be a work group established under the Conservation Commission?
Couldn't we, since the Lewis and Auburn Community Forest Board is one of our subgroups by ordinance changes, and its focus is community forest, to reach out, and I know we've got at least two here, reach out to the Auburn members to create Auburn Forest Work Group that encompasses all of those aspects that are not covered under the working community forest. And ask those 4 members from the Auburn side how they would perceive structuring the work group. because the board could still stand. The work group doesn't have to be under them, it still could come directly from us, another arm. Or we may see once it gets going, if Ben was here, you know how we turned out trails, we didn't each do our own, we went to collaborate. This may be someplace that once it's defined and some work's done, the community forest board would say, we have an interest in working with them or making them part of us. But that we have the authority to go directly and create a forest work group that specifically excludes the work of the community forest board or works in collaboration with them, but addresses these more important things, because again, when we hear about the ag zone, we're talking about, what, 40% of the land in the ag zone? That's a big chunk of land.
40% of land in the city of Auburn,
Yeah.
Is forest. Yeah,
forest and farm.
yeah.
I will say, the only problem with that is that we are the only two Auburn residents on the forest board right now, with Dave Griswold resigning, and then there's been a long-standing vacancy. We're trying to get those filled right now, but there would be a whole lot to work with outside of this group already.
Well, again, it brings the second example this particular board has had in wanting to get some work done and not having people because the city won't promote the volunteer list. Now, I think I did see community forest board listing in the announcement, the last one that the city clerk did, but Parks has not. Parks is down to 2 people because they refuse to post, and it's an inconsistent situation. Is if they've posted community forest board in the past, they should continue to do that. Our Parks group is no different than any other work group that the city has established. So maybe this group needs to take a fairly firm position. And somebody said, well, maybe what we do is add the word that the Conservation Commission is looking for people to work in parks. Conservation is looking for people to work for community forest. Conservation is looking for people to work on this forest here. And I know the 2 of you can't do it alone, and again, somebody like Bill Sylvester, I would hope would be part of that because he's the great tie-in to what we need right now. You know, the other's got a good work plan and it is moving along, but this is a big hole.
And I think the other element is that basically we have the authority, if there is an virtual name in the city council those signing position, we have the authority basically to name some interim people so that so they can get to work and get the job done.
That's right.
And I don't mean this in a threatening way to the council, but basically there are, we can move a lot more quickly, and if there's a need, like, let's do it.
Right. No, we're so in this way, so she's do you have any comments?
I don't have any comments.
And would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Chris Carson.
Chris.
I'm just, I'm on the Mayor's Action Group Committee, so
We're really
coming to listen.
happy to see you.
Yes.
You see, with Chris, Bill, and Kathy, you see, I have to walk the straight and narrow all the time.
Well, Mr. Keene, I know we're maybe jumping around, but could you explain to me, because this was our November agenda that we moved forward, and you said they'd be discussing the final vote on the 29th of November, and you'd be abstaining and leaving the room to avoid a conflict of interest. Now, we don't need the specifics, but since you were there as the commission's representative, do you have to leave the room and not vote? Okay, thank you.
No, essentially that was, at that particular time, you see, at the November agenda, that would have been prior to our last mayor's ad hoc committee.
Okay.
And I was seeking the guidance of our own group, and essentially, I just wanted to make sure that there was no perception at all of undue influence from my standpoint. That gap has been filled, and I appreciate each of the members basically emailed me privately so that I had the benefit of your input.
Good, I just was a bit concerned.
So that's one item that can be crossed out.
So is there any reason why we could not create a work group specifically for specifically for agricultural.
I think we could
Even if
establish
it's
a work
only
group and it
A
would,
90-day trial to see what happens and who's interested, to pull some more people into a more structured group with a very specific agenda,
I
and then
think
circle back around to see.
You know, I
I keep
think
looking
that-
around the room, and I know there are people that would be interested in collaborating a little more.
Well, and again, if we follow our practice, and we've been doing it now for 3 years, we always establish a work group first. We don't jump into
Right.
bigger things. And we typically give them a minimum of 90 days, and we've renewed that.
which starts at their first meeting.
From the start of their first actual community public meeting. And when it has been beneficial, like our Trails Work Group, we continue that sort of in just the work group category. So I think that we should do this. The worst that can happen is somebody can say, oh no, we're going to create a formal one through the city as a whole, equal to conservation or other similar groups, and so goodbye. But we'll get some work done in the meantime. The other benefit of our work group is that we don't go out and post and worry about all that. We really reach out and just say, as we have with all the other, if you have an interest in a Auburn Forest work group, here's where you come to meet. And they're part of the group, and we've done that with every one of our work groups. Those who've expressed interest have come to a meeting, are part of that work group, and have the right to vote as long as they're an Auburn resident in whatever work of that committee or subcommittee is done. So I don't know whether you want these separately or together, but I'd be happy to make a motion.
We would need a champion for
Right.
each one.
Yeah, we do.
So if we have someone who wants to step forward as a champion for them separately or them together, I'd be fine with that. But
To expedite things, wouldn't it be, the cleanest job to basically authorize a chairman to name one or more people in a tentative capacity for a particular work group? And then, she can consult with anybody she wishes and talk about, but that way we can move quickly, and we can move cleanly, and yet achieve their objectives.
I would like to, I don't want to delay this a month, I think we need to take action tonight, but Jordan was also correct in that we've always done it with somebody who's been willing to champion. Now, since I see nice faces here that are not members, and before we took action on this, I obviously want to hear from our other people present, but we happen to have always had a commissioner as a champion,
right.
which then quickly converted the chair of the committee in, I think, of Parks. Misty Edgecombe I'm on the committee, but she's the chair. So we could either seek out, the way you suggested, ask here, maybe we've got a public person who'd be willing to be the champion while we get the rest, and then do exactly what you said, that, set up a time, place, and
Well, I like the word champion because
Which is
it's
what we've always
representing and
Right.
then bringing it back. They don't necessarily need to be chair of
Right.
that work
Right.
group.
It's more link than a particular office.
I guess I'd like to ask our guests, first of all, is there a need to separate these groups based on your experience with Mural Ad Hoc Committee? Should we separate forest and agriculture right now into two different work groups and have champion for each? Or is it more beneficial to keep them together in the meantime for that initial 90-day trial and maybe separate them after? Is there any preference on that based on what you've been talking about at your meetings?
Come on, Kathy.
I don't have a preference.
I don't know, first of all, know the scope of these work groups that you folks have created. I think, in my estimation, it would be more important to begin the process, and whether that means you initially have them together, so that it can be moved forward. I think we need to have as many sharp minds looking at these issues as we possibly can.
So our work groups haven't been created yet, but basically we have a work group which allows for more flexibility of the group tackling that problem. Basically, there's a champion, someone to lead it in a more informal way, and the work group establishes their own primary objective or set of objectives to tackle within their 90-day period. If they find that they want to keep working, they request an extension for another 90-day period, and we can grant that. But it basically is open to whatever that work group feels they need to tackle.
The
You know, as
initial,
far as scope is concerned, basically, the intent is that the work group, each work group, determine its own scope, and then change it as they go along, because if something needs doing, do it. And the work group can plot its own sense of direction.
we did start with a broad purpose of the work group. It isn't like we have said, oh, we'd like one of these. They do start with a purpose, and the best example I can think of is the cemetery work group. You know, and so we, purpose that we said, yeah, if we have a champion, go for it, was to look at the needs in the cemeteries in Auburn and their needs and what was happening. And upon the first planning meeting, hasn't even had a public meeting, just with co-chairs, have laid out 3 or 4 objectives for the coming year that we could work on as a work group, making them manageable and small to see success and see where they may go. We're at that stage, we haven't even done a public one, because by the time we got organized, it's like farmers only have certain time of year, no one really wants to do cemeteries in the winter, so we're done probably until March for anything like that. But its purpose, really, already identified, is if we created this a work group, we would use the words that has just been used tonight of why we're putting them together. And then from there, the champion would gather people. We might have a planning meeting before, and then say, okay, our first meeting of the Auburn Forest Work Group is going to be the second Wednesday of December at 4 o'clock at City Hall. Anybody interested is welcome, and we would promote that kind of notice. Does that help?
My suggestion would be basically to separate the two, because at this late date, you know, if you try to combine the two, you're really getting such a large scope that neither one can focus on their particular needs. You know, if we had a longer time window, it'd be different, but I think at this particular time, there are enough pressing issues in both areas, that it would be an asset to have individual groups. And I think, you know, it's going to tie in, we're at a point in time where there's going to be a lot of increasing discussion about carbon and that sort of thing. And essentially, we need to be able to be nimble and move quick to basically, hopefully, fill a constructive role.
So Gabby, you said you didn't have a preference. Did you see an impediment if we separated them? Because I look across and see what I consider 2 forests and 2 farmers possibly sitting in front of us. Based on the need that was.
The only impediment that I see is the lack of hard-working bodies.
Yeah.
And you need the lack of bodies to do the hard work, right?
I mean, yes, that's right, the lack of volunteers to sit on these boards, because it's a problem not only just with this group, but with every group that I've belonged to. Lots of great ideas, but not enough physical manpower to move them forward.
No, I think the discussion we had here before, potentially as far as both the forest and the ag, is that the first step would be to contact the members of the study group and to see if they would be interested and hopefully might join at least for that temporary window, because they already have the benefit of a tremendous amount of background with the consultant last year. And Bill is very familiar with, you know, the needs of the forest industry and that sort of thing, and you know, add 1 or 2 more, and but you know, I think that's a lot with the limited time window. right now with the season of the year and everything else, to me, that would be a very logical place to start, and hopefully the entire group would be willing to commit themselves for that period of time, and then they could decide, what the best route is, the best options from that point on.
And I think you're right, Kathy, about the needs for volunteers and the general lack of it for variety. But what a couple of things. One, he's right, that's who we'd reach out to first. Work groups are only usually 3 to 7 people, unless there's great enthusiasm. Sometimes by project, I think of the parks. I mean, we had at some point 15 people working on it because they were interested in very specific projects, and so we could see that. But I would think, or would hope, between the people here, the people that come to the informal meetings, the mayor's ad hoc, and the original study group, that we can find enough people interested or concerned enough to commit for this short time to get it started. Define the objectives, what resources do we need, who else can we collaborate with, and where should we go next? If we could get that done. But I think I feel the urgency not to just do something for the need of it, but things are moving so rapidly with the current documentation alone that I think most people aren't able to keep up, or the public even being informed.
The mayor is hoping that our 18th meeting of the mayor's ad hoc committee will be the last, and depending on what occurs at that point, it really will determine, what's next.
Right.
And that's why I feel it would be a real asset to have a chair given the authority to move nimbly.
Well, and that's the other side. If the mayor's committee does happen the way expected, which is all over on December 18th, with whatever results, good, bad, or indifferent, and we've dismantled the study group, the ongoing need has been clearly identified by both the study group and the work group and our own conversations we've had over time here. So I think these are two necessary places we should be looking at right now. And when you mentioned I'm going to call it the natural resource section of forestry, carbon and all of that, we've already said this little group of 7 of us can't accomplish all that. So we do need those other spokes.
I think it's really tough. I hear what Kathy's saying. I almost want to say to start them as the same, which are going to involve similar people that are already working together, and let them decide if it's more beneficial after a few more meetings, if there is enough forest people to break off from agricultural, allow them to continue to collaborate. And in the same sense, that would give more resources and time to them to try and figure out what other resources and information we need to pull together, because this is happening really fast.
I think to get the ball rolling, it wouldn't hurt to just have one group, there's one meeting time,
Yeah.
one place, everyone can get together and start talking, and it is a 90-day trial period, so if at the end of that 90 days there's a need to split and there's enough people to split, I think that would be the time to do it. I just don't want to create too many options. It's one zone, it's currently been one group, and I totally agree that there are separate, and they have separate needs, separate objectives, but I think initially to get the most amount of people interested in rolling, I think creating one working group, having them run the 90-day period is probably the best way to go and the easiest way to manage everything.
I could support that if you didn't include the 90 days, because my guess is that at the first meeting, they can make that decision.
Okay.
And I would think they should have that option.
I didn't take her 90 days as being required to
Yeah.
stay together.
Oh, see,
I
that
took her
makes
90 days, I thought she was just being emphatic, like we've done is, first of all, you don't start the clock until there's a meeting. And then the second is that they don't have to worry about coming back for at least 90 days, but they can come back the next week and say, great idea, but we need to separate. So I didn't take it the other way.
Yeah.
I don't know what you
It was more so
meant.
up to 90 days to decide, if they want to keep going as one. But if they do decide sooner to split, I think we would all be in favor of that. They don't have to stay together all night. Yeah, do we have a motion from someone?
So I would motion that we create a Auburn Forest and Farm Ag work group
Okay.
for a period of at least 90 days.
Or is it up to 90?
I can second it.
Am I right to assume that it'd be authorizing the chair to find some tentative people to
First, let's get all in favor of.
Well, wait a minute,
Well,
it's missing one
do you wanna-
piece.
oh.
One is, do you really mean for 90 days or up to? Because we just had that discussion.
Up to 90.
And what is the purpose of us doing this? I think that just needs to be documented in the motion.
To continue collaboration and information gathering specific to the ag center.
Could we say something along the lines of to continue the work started by the mural ad hoc?
I hate to put that in there.
No, yeah, why is that?
I don't know.
How about if we just said to continue the work that's been done in Auburn in these two areas?
Yeah.
And then it would even encourage private, because I know that when I was sitting in the audience, to me, Bill was doing a lot of stuff to bring more forest stuff in, because he seemed to be the only forester on that board. So,
Because I feel like there's always been a need, we just haven't filled it yet. Now we have this pressing opportunity to fill a need. I feel like there have been work groups ahead
Don't
of
wanna
the
attach it.
mayor's ad
Yeah.
hoc. Yeah, and I don't want to attach it to
No,
it.
that makes sense.
We try to keep it independent so that it's really focused on conservation.
she seconded it.
All in favor? Okay, and as far as assigning a champion,
Do we have a
do you
volunteer?
have a
by chance?
volunteer? Can be someone on the commission or member of the public, doesn't have to be a commission member.
Mr. Keen, would you,
We can take the two.
because you're doing such a good job and I promise to help keep supporting you, but you are quite a fire that cannot be burned out. right?
As long as it's not to exceed 90 days.
Okay.
We
You
promise you
commit to
that.
at least 90 days. Okay. So I motion Mr. Keen to chair up
Okay.
our 90-day work group.
With appreciation, I second that.
All in favor?
Are you going to oppose or abstain?
Yes,
Yes.
We have to make sure we bring him cookies.
Yes.
both.
And then, so probably the two of you can get together to clarify the, requests we're going to put out to these others and just send them out to the current mayor's group, the past study group, and ideally a public post that said, here's the time date, this is what we hope to achieve at the first meeting.
If there are lists of the contact information for both the standing mayoral ad hoc group and then the previous.
Eric Cousin should have both.
Eric Cousins.
In worst case, if not, we can watch the video. Because in the videos too, they may find people, and Joe wasn't on the group, but he may be willing to look at this group.
All right. Was there another agenda?
Do we want to ask for any additional public comment?
Yeah, any additional public comment,
Yeah, I
either
was-
related to, I was gonna say, is there anything specific to
We
the
already
mayoral
did
ad
that.
hoc group? But, any other public comment, either related to that or generally speaking, any concerns you have about conservation, tips, suggestions? All right.
Very quiet group.
I appreciate the opportunity to be invited to this group. This ad hoc committee group that we are working on is, in my mind, working very fast to make some pretty significantly drastic changes that may not sound that may not sound like there's gonna be a lot of consequences, but I think it just is fraught with big, deep potholes concerned. I think that with the very few changes that have been suggested, without really looking at all of the different layers, that we could substantially see a big change in our conservation, forestry, and agricultural zone. I'm not ready for those changes, and I don't think that the city of Auburn is ready for those changes either.
So you have your last meeting coming up?
I believe we are being told it's going to be the last meeting, whether it will be or not remains to be seen.
And that's the
Well,
December.
basically,
December
the
18th.
council only authorized a 90-day period.
Was that
And
right?
essentially, the clock started ticking on October 2nd. And I've asked our council, one council, but I haven't had a response yet to exactly whether, the council was, was going to stand by that, or whether they go ahead. I think the mayor very definitely, and, a good, it's very likely that I think with the 18th to be the last meeting. One way, I'm assuming that the action of the ad hoc committee will, address that issue at that time, and I assume it will be the final one. And then we'll have a clear sense of direction after that. And basically, the big, as Kathy raised it, question 1 point, what happens after this? And I think, with the action that you've taken on, on the new business 7A 1 and 2, basically, we're ready to move, basically move whichever direction they go. I think that particular authorization we can start fulfilling it immediately, and essentially, by the time the first meeting is held, we'll know exactly what the options are.
The other part is, I don't know if the plan is to move off from this discussion, but I know that I'm hoping we have some more discussion here tonight about some of these things. I didn't realize that was a hard and fast 90 days for the mayors. And again, not hearing, she had to say.
Well, if you read the.
Oh, I believe you're correct, I just missed that.
I forget 11 dash something or other.
Yeah, but.
That, I purposely was looking for a specific timeframe. It is, if you read the language, it's pretty specific.
And when you talk about the 11 dash that you were talking about, I tried to find, I assume you're not talking about the definitions and all that.
No, I'm talking about a council resolve.
Right, okay, that's where I thought you were.
11
So the
dash.
question,
I think it's 018
Yeah.
or.
yes, 2018 11 dash something.
Okay.
All right, I know what you're talking about. So the question is, before the meeting on the 18th, and part of the reason I think we met here tonight is to provide either some more input or ask our questions that Mr. Keene, and thankfully now we have other members of this committee present to hear them. Because I'm shocked to think that we're at a point that they could make a decision on the 3 things I keep hearing about. The 50% rule, the 10-acre minimum, and now, and I don't even know the pieces, I'm hoping somebody in the room tonight can explain it, but I received an email as a Lake Auburn Watershed Protection Commissioner and a member of the Water District concerned about proposed changes in the ag zone that would even be so restrictive that you cannot clean or maintain your tractor. And I'm thinking, I know I'm not an expert in agricultural services, but I would expect to be able to clean a tractor in my own neighborhood, and I live in the city. So I'd like somebody to sort of maybe even update us, not only, I know you've sent us stuff, but part of this is also a public record of where we are, what's expected on the 18th, and what the rest of this is talking about.
No, it's my understanding that basically the point that you raised essentially was addressed to the planning.
Okay,
And
And note that the planning board is supposed to meet tomorrow night, and it's not on the public government calendar. So was that an oversight or deliberate? Because I had a note that the egg was coming up.
But I think, you know, as far as the mayor's ad hoc committee is concerned, you know, you mentioned basically the 10-acre rule and the 50% rule, which essentially, when we started addressing that, and you started looking at how many pieces were floating around, and then that creates the magnitude of the situation, and so essentially, the proposal of one of the members has presented essentially supposedly addresses some of those things, but it also opens up a few more cans of worms, right? I guess probably is the nicest way to say it. And also it apparently now includes permission for additional housing to be built in the natural resource zone, which I'm not sure how that falls in the 50% or 10-acre rule, but it's a part of one of the proposal. And I think if you read essentially the draft and proposal that I emailed each member basically.
Right,
You know,
I
just
remember
followed
reading
it.
it
So
back, right.
you can read essentially what we're going to be addressing on the 18th.
Morris, are you talking about the smaller, non-conforming lots? The lots under 10 acres?
Well, you know, basically, that's only part of it, you know, the whole package proposal is what we're going to be addressing. And it addresses allowing some Auburn residents to build new residents and it excludes others.
Yeah.
So I think there's also a major fairness issue involved there.
So this that you provide us with, are they asking you to basically approve or disapprove of this at your next meeting? And what happens from there, do you not know?
Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I think they're pushing to have that approved, and I think there are other things that we could push for to get in there. But that's the current language, I believe, the stuff you forwarded today. I'm not sure what you guys are looking at, but if that's the stuff that he forwarded today, then that's, I think, the current language that's been proposed. It basically states that anyone with an agricultural piece of land that's larger than 3 acres as of a certain date, so that people can't go and subdivide right now, can build a home on it if there is no existing home. So these are vacant agricultural plots between 3 and probably 500 acres, right? 600 acres. I don't know.
Essentially.
Yeah, however big the plot is. And they would, if they do not have a structure currently, a residence, they would be able to build one residence.
So you hit one of my concerns. 3 acres is not very big.
Right.
And I know 10 was a problem, but when 10 was a problem, we were looking at places that were 8-point-something, 9 plus, that were non-conforming to some other rule. So 3, when I read that, I thought, oh, I must not understand. 3 is way too small, number one. 2, your explanation that I think is absolutely correct, at least it makes me feel better because that's what I thought I read, is that again, anybody with 3 acres is going to build a house if it's in the ag zone.
Potentially,
Doesn't have
yeah,
to-
if they
Right,
meet the
well, that
new-
wasn't our purpose of
Right.
going back to the study. The first thing we needed to do was to reduce the burden of the 51% rule because families and businesses' structures have changed since the 1960s when that went in. So that, to me, when that was tasked, and the 10-acre was this other stuff. But the other thing that came through the study group, to me, the most important, speaking as a non-agricultural person, was preserving our farms and supporting our local farmers in order to improve the health of our residents, our community as a whole as a place to live. And if we skip all that and just say, oh, all we need is 3 acres and you can build a house,
We're
Then you might as well, you're
focus.
destroying the entire ag and natural resources, because anybody with 3 acres, that's the goal. I mean, they'd love to build every 3 acres around Lake Auburn.
Right.
And we've heard that, and we've heard it from past mayors, and we hear it from everybody. And I'm not opposed to development, but my very first thing is to protect our drinking water.
Mhm.
And does that mean you can't get land there? Show me the numbers, kind of thing. But I want to protect our drinking water. I want to protect the agricultural land. The fact we can sit here 40-something years later, almost 50, and say, we've got 40% of our property protected, we need to continue that, because our own economic development department has told us, for at least the last 8 years I've been involved, that we have plenty of places here in town, you know, and then circle down, that opportunities for housing and opportunities for residential development. We do not need to destroy our agricultural area. I did hear one other thing tonight that I've probably been proposing the opposite. Whatever they do, I keep saying, please, don't do it citywide. I realize that creates a bias if I say that, say, well, you own property where I'd like them to test it, I own property and I might want to and can't. So I hadn't thought about that. But I just fear that it's like letting the dogs out on the 40 acres, and now you're going to tell, on the 40% of our city, and you only need 3 acres, and I can build a house with no agricultural.
There are supposedly still agricultural requirements
Mhm.
for people that do want to build on the 3 acre.
How strong were they? Because I missed it. I mean,
They've
$1,000
been
a year, I can do it in my backyard.
Some of that, which I had brought up before, and part of that was to change, for example, if you have 10 chickens. So now I have 3 acres of land and 10 chickens, and I invest $1,000. So there's my food, my chickens, and probably a coop, and I'm good. And I get my house.
Yeah.
So in respecting the residents that cannot build and want to, which is what was, I felt, the driving factor, the urgency, is they're getting away from the protection of the agricultural zone. It seems more heavily weighted and driven on how do we get residential in here? How do we
Right.
expand? How do we develop this area of land, which again is 40%, which is 20,000 acres that we're talking about all over the city.
So my understanding right now is that there is a decent amount of concern with what's proposed and what you're being asked to decide on. So pumping the brakes might not be a bad thing. I have 2 questions. One is which, say this was approved, who does it go to next? Are you the say-all be-all and it goes into action, or does it go to city council after you? Okay.
At least I think it goes to
Yeah, it recommends,
Planning.
it's a recommendation, whatever comes out of that is a recommendation to the city council.
Gotcha.
If there are positive recommendations, or if they're opposed, one or the other. And a question, initially, the language appeared to be that it should go to the Conservation Commission and the Planning Board for their input, and
That was my
and
assumption.
we assumed, or at least I assumed, the way it was worded, that that would occur before our final vote. But now, essentially, in our group, we've been told that essentially, no, we go ahead, we just go ahead, our recommendation would go directly to the council, and we'd ask for comment from the other 2 groups.
Well,
So,
luckily
can
it's
I
written
actually
in our-
just read, because we are taking this for the public,
Yep.
this 3rd revision.
The ones did this
If
afternoon.
we back right up, so this is our Agricultural Protection District, section 60-144, the actual purpose of this. Let me read this. The purposes of this district are to allow for conservation of natural resources, open space, and encourage agricultural, forestry, and certain types of recreational use. It is declared to be in the best interest of the public that these areas should be protected and conserved because of their natural, aesthetic, and scenic value, the need to retain and preserve open space lands, their economic contribution to the city, and primarily because these areas are so remote from existing sectors of development that any added uncontrolled growth could result in an economic burden to this city and its inhabitants, yada, yada. Going back to that, I don't see anything that's pushing residential in these areas. What I see is we need to take a step back. That the whole purpose is to conserve this area. So before we open Pandora's box where we can't go back, again, let me reiterate that we need this sub-work groups to spend some more time with the data that's already out there that hasn't even been brought to the table. You know, what is the pollution of each residence? Like, when we talk about fertilizing lawns, when we talk about how close are we to a water source, when we talk about how many animals are we gonna put in there. So, you know,
And
again,
they haven't talked to those people.
before we do that, we need that raw data so that we can look very objectively at what it looks like now, what it's gonna look like after, before we open Pandora's box. I think we have a lot of that data already. The soil samples we talked about, that whole CAD program is having some either students or outside help to look at that data and compare that to this is now and this is what could happen. Before we have a this is what's happening. There's so much resources in that huge amount of land that is untapped in a way, yet could be more valuable in the future than utilizing it now. We're talking about global warming and conserving clean water and energy and the cost to the city if we start developing these areas. So before we do that, we should see how much that value is now.
Right.
We did talk outside in other meetings about looking at what is the value of the agricultural zone as is right now.
And by value, are you only determining it on
Value
tax
of
assessed or
No, it could
value that you can't measure in hard dollars?
both. So what's the value of preserving that?
Right.
What is return on investment for it already cleaning up the air
Yeah.
and water on its own without affecting that? So we need somebody or
Mhm.
peoples to come in and have some time to do that. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen maybe even 90 days, but there is, the more we've dug into this, and I know everybody else has dug into this, the more information we've found. Like, where was this 90 days ago? Where was this 6 months ago? And I think the purpose right there at the very beginning says that all. I don't see anything about residential in here. And there's such a small few of Auburn residents right now that are trying to influence that huge area of land, respecting that the landowners that can't build on their land right now have been held up. But in the same sense, they have been held up.
And they knew it when they got it.
When they knew when they got it, when they bought it, when they inherited it, it's been like that for 45 years, 50 years, 100 years. Some people have known that forever. Some people also farm their land and don't live on it and make it work. So what is another 90 days or a little more time? What is the urgency? What is the rush, this sense of urgency? What do we have to lose to wait a little bit longer to make a
I
really
definitely
informed
agree.
decision on conservation?
I agree, and I think back to your point, while they might want to wait until there's a vote to ask, the Conservation Commission in their ordinance has the authority to make recommendations on the use of open space and give recommendations to the planning boards and council or whatever group. So I think if there's, enough concern that the conservation, that I as chair could sign, and there's concern about what's being proposed not matching with the original task of the group, and that a decision, be postponed, I think that's something within the authority of the Conservation Commission if we decided we wanted to do that before the vote or meeting on December 18th, I think.
I would agree with you that one, we have the authority to, I think we ought to do it, because this is much too fast. And I believe that conservation and planning board were going to be part of the process when the mayor's committee got close enough to have a document or a product that they could evaluate. Now, and that hasn't happened, and I've been part of those, too little, too late, it's all passed, and then you forget it. We can all remember the comp plan of 2010 and the ordinance change on Center Street are two examples that nobody gets input. And the public doesn't know this, and that's the other part. If we're talking 40% of our city, we need some community conversations, we need some education parts, and we don't have enough information to give education. We could invite people in and they could share data, but it hasn't been collaborated in that. We don't have a recommendation to discuss and present. So this is much too quick, and at some point, if people think, I would hope that we would have a
We
motion
have
tonight.
golden opportunities right now
Yeah.
where we've had people reach out to us. You know,
Can I just read from our
Sure.
ordinance very quickly? The commission may recommend to the city council or to any board of the city or to any public body or public agency of the state a program for the better protection, development, or use of such open areas, which may include the acquisition of conservation easements.
So as part of whatever motion we make tonight, we need to reference that authority.
Your comments are an excellent background and solid platform for in consideration of the item under new business, which says communications work group.
I took this communication work group to be the egg project, not us, right? But did you, isn't that where it is?
Basically, it was, I think, John earlier this year had the conversation with the PI person.
Yeah,
And
okay.
essentially,
So our
John indicated that there might be another conversation sometime over the holidays. And if that, turned out positive, if we should provide John the option that if it appeared following that discussion and dialogue, if she felt they had merit, give her the authority to basically pursue that particular option, because I think very definitely in the Mayor's Ad hoc Committee, some of us have talked among ourselves that really there's a serious lack of communication. The information is just not out there. We've got the information, and if we an opportunity to reach out to the academic institutions, we've had additional information, and essentially that, speaking of facts and discussion, we need a method to obtain the facts and to make those facts and that information available. For example, the initial reason for having, or at least the council's perspective at that particular time in 1960, was to prevent urban sprawl. And now, information that we have right at this specific time, population in 1960
Was more than it is
24,000, and
today.
it's only 23,000 something right now. Another topic, basically, from the tax records, there are 182 residences that are coded residential in the so-called ag zone, but there are only roughly 30 farmers, so we already have 150 plus more I shouldn't say non-farmers, because they're good neighbors and they're good people. But basically, that's existing residences that already exist there. Speaking about soils, the numbers we had available was that there's roughly 4,200 acres originally of prime agricultural land in Auburn. There's only 1,200 left to be in the ag zone. And that's as it exists right now, and that's information that we were provided.
In here,
And
and that
I-
is, why isn't that on the front
And I
page
think,
of the city's?
another thing from
the newspaper.
Ken Meta's study, essentially, he provided information that basically the city loses, the city is in the red, about 16 cents on every dollar for every residence. So basically, the ag zone and the business areas are subsidizing residences already.
Right.
Now, how does that support building additional residences? And the question of fairness that I raised that really troubles me, and the so-called legacy landowners that owned property or the families owned property prior to 1960, I think they have been disadvantaged some because basically the city has changed the evaluation procedures. But what this proposal, and I think it'd be well for you to read it if possible, basically, it allows those that purchase land in the ag zone between, once the current zoning ordinance was put in place, roughly 1964 or 5. Between then and 2000, January 2018, wasn't it? Those that purchased that, knowing that they couldn't build, would be allowed to build. And yet it would not provide that same privilege to those that, from January 1 onward. And
What happens to the people who've owned the land since 1961? Let's just, for public, so you talked about those from when the zoning change came in 64 to January 1st of this year, as now being able to do that. What happens to the people who have owned the land prior to 61? The legacy people that I care about.
well, those
Would
would
they
be
be allowed?
as allowed as a part of
Okay,
that.
so they go to
Anybody
that.
prior
So
to
the only
January
one
1st.
is that, now, isn't the reason that the January 1st date is proposed, so how would you handle this? Because I think the reason for it, not that I have to agree with the how, is to prevent people from rapidly going out and purchasing land now, knowing they can do this,
Subdividing it.
right, knowing they can do it. So a back date, particularly if you're giving something away, which is what we were doing, if they couldn't do it until now, and now we're going to allow it in some form, on some size, somehow, then we are giving something, so I guess I'm not as concerned about the less notice, because how would you protect this, the reason for it? How would you protect the city, the residents, the community, is where I would put the word, from not having these people come in and just buy to develop?
Well,
Especially
it's
if you end up
still,
with 3 acres.
it's almost like it's justifying urban sprawl
Right.
in a controlled manner.
Yeah.
It's two wrongs not making a
Yeah.
right, but they're trying to justify that.
Well, for me, it was, I
We're
would agree
talking,
with the.
what was Eric's, 267 lots will fall in this? Does that sound right to you, Kathy?
Between 3 and 10 acres.
Yeah,
I
that
think
would be
Ms.
allowed
McKee
to
said that
build.
there's 70, I believe, the number that we were told is 70 lots within 3 to 10 acres. That if they meet the required frontage, could potentially be built.
I thought when we had that meeting, the first reading, Eric wrote that it was 267.
What was the 260?
Yeah, there are, that may include
Does
the
that
ones that are
sound-
larger than 10
Okay.
acres. Because a good number of these lots, I mean, if you think about it,
Are far more than.
what they're basically saying is there are these weird lots that have pre-existed that were at some point created that were smaller than 10 acres. Now you can't create anything smaller than 10 acres.
Unless the city makes a mistake.
Right, unless the city makes a mistake or some weird
Yes,
thing
good
happens, but
documentation.
the current zoning is 10 acres. So what they're saying is there are all these orphaned lots that are agriculturally zoned, that are between 3 and 10 acres, and there are about 70 of these that are all ag. And they're trying to give a one-time exemption to those people, is my understanding here, to allow them to build one home on those properties. And then this would also allow people who have 10 acres or more. So if I had a farm of 500 acres, I could conceivably divide it up into 50 10-acre parcels. And then if they had the required road frontage and, or I wanted to build roads into my land, I could then essentially have 50 lots that then could each have one home.
Right. That's what I know I don't want.
Right, and that's
In case I
where
need to
some
be
danger
connected
is.
to the
And now you're
or something like
saying-
that.
Under the current zoning, it's very difficult because theoretically you could But the problem is that right now they'd have to meet the income test, the 50% income test, and that's onerous.
So by
And-
reducing also the lot size and the income, it really opens it up more readily.
I think the income test opens it up more. You know, don't you guys agree? I mean, I would say that the income test is what really takes the strictures off, because right now, there's nothing preventing a farmer from taking an 800-acre, 500-acre lot and making the 50 lots out of it. Nothing really prevents them from doing that, and the road frontage rules are, you know, the same right now. It's a question of, can he find 50 people who could meet the income test right now?
I feel like this
And that's
is,
difficult.
this is so ridiculous though, if we decrease this to 3 acres, and then all they need to do is invest $1,000, right?
Right.
You're telling me you have money to build a home,
Mhm.
but you don't have more than $1,000 for your farm? I'm
That's all
very
required,
confused
yeah.
about that. That's just, I
Well, that's
can't
because they really
even.
don't want it to be a farm. They
Right.
But
really
if
want
I
people
wanted
to
a
build-
pet horse and build a new home, I can go
I
out
think
in
part
the
of it
ag
too is
zone
this-
and go build a brand new home and have a pet horse.
Yeah.
Only if you own the land before January 1st.
And I think there's a notion of changing agriculture going on here. You know, there is this notion that agriculture, as we've known it traditionally, is changing, and farmers our farms are becoming both smaller and larger. You know, you're getting these huge ConAgras, and you're getting the
Yeah.
Cathys of the world. And so, not to say that you are, you know, substantially different than ConAgra, but you're
This sounds
substantially different.
exactly like a lot of discussions we've had in the ad hoc committee, but the more explanation you do, the more moving pieces you find,
Yeah.
and basically, it almost, you know, some of us, I guess, feel that it's a good time to just sit still, lean back, and get the facts and take a kind of look at things, as opposed to jumping into something. And I think, you know, basically, Chris has done a lot of digging, and essentially, a lot of the larger communities are finally beginning to realize that essentially, this suburban sprawl is costing a lot of money, because it looks good initially, but the cost of servicing over the years, basically, taxpayers in future years end up paying, and that's where the 16% subsidy, or whatever you want to call it, keeps coming in. And so really there's a strong incentive, if you start thinking about it, for smaller footprint housing rather than larger footprints and scattered housing.
Right.
But there again, you could, the discussion here is almost a carbon copy
Yeah.
of what we've been putting through.
But it's good because this is being taken from the public. So.
And essentially, I'm sure that, you know, my friends will basically recognize and probably feel like a replay of what they've already heard.
But the more times it's heard, because now tonight, just getting sort of the rest of the story on little lines, that issue about only having 1,200, we went from 4,200 to 1,200 is enough for me to say, wait. The whole food, I go back to, you're right, we should be focused on this, but the thing I learned the most out of that study group had to do with real farming that we could do here. And since that's happened, you know, we've had the romaine lettuce stuff and all of that, and I personally believe in my lifetime, and maybe I'm going to live a long time, I don't think so, that we are going to need to have our food grown locally. Locally meaning someplace I can go and get it, not something shipped from California or Mexico or Chile or wherever. It may mean I don't get strawberries in December, but it just makes the June ones all the tastier. So I want to support, and at some point we need a motion, that we recommend to the city council to pause, push the button, pause, for a minimum of 90 days. During that time, the mayor's group can continue to work, our work groups might get together and include, and maybe we have to host them, community conversation, maybe a bigger than what you get to do offer because of space, that we hold those and we bring them in. You're right about the house thing. Your cousin told me my first year on the council that any house built in Auburn that was less than $250,000 was costing us money. I remember that conversation because I believe that's true, so there was no doubt. But what is the median house in Auburn right now? It's a number like around 142,000. So the median people in this community will not be able to afford to build or buy one of these houses, because really, we're not talking about 150. They're going to do a minimum of 250 in these beautiful, pristine, protected places. They're going to do what you said, get our 3 acres, build a beautiful house from people from away, and do $1,000.
I'll also say that with a smaller lot, just because farming practices might be evolving and you can farm on a smaller scale, doesn't mean that, you know, aquifer restoration and recharging and water purification and carbon sequestration can all happen on smaller scales. So just because, you know, it might be easier to farm on a 3-acre lot now, doesn't mean that the rest of it's not just an agricultural zone, it's an agricultural natural resource zone, and we can't let that other half fall by the wayside, because a lot of the times those services that nature provides can't be done on these fragmented lots. So it's an important thing to, you know, keep that in the conversation. But I like hearing a potential motion,
I'm ready.
not necessarily putting work on pause, but delaying the vote to approve whatever they put
Whatever
forward.
decision that they recommend, if they even get to recommending, I'd ask them to pause as well, but we don't have authority there, we have our space for the council. But yes, and including that motion, it doesn't have to all be written here, because I trust the chair and vice chair can take care of it, but that our authority is identified, the purpose here is identified, the need that we've talked about here, the reason to pause. And you can provide some data, the 4,600, the sprawl number, the 16% cost to the rest of us. And that doesn't even touch other things that I know you've put on. For me, it's the quiet pleasure of agricultural and natural resources that I don't want to lose, because it's gone forever. These are forever decisions. There's no divorce and we get to live separately. This is a forever decision and should be taken with due diligence.
The other positive thing is, within the next 90 days, is Auburn's 10-year strategic planning committee will have all their subcommittees finalized, all of their data and recommendations in those 90 days. And like I was telling Kat the other night, we have our second meeting this week, but our first meeting, all the different various subcommittees and work groups at the very end of the night, and it was a long night. The common top 5, top 4 are about preserving the agricultural zone, the clean water, the clean air and environment, and then bringing in the next generation. So what I did is I went back and I asked some of these millennials that I know, including my daughter, I have asked people out in the community and their children, what makes you stay in Auburn? What would keep you in Auburn? And again, they come back to clean air, water, you know, recreation, the amenities that Auburn has, which are all tied to conservation. So if we want to bring these millennials into this area, or this new workforce into the area, you're going to hear more and more about conserving what Auburn already has and utilizing that. If we have this work group in the next 90 days, we have the benefit of another 90
That gives
days
them the time.
of that to collaborate even some more.
So the motion put forth would be to have the chair submit basically a letter of concern and to recommend delaying the vote on this while allowing the mayoral ad hoc committee and the newly established forest work group and agriculture work group to continue working for 90 days.
Please don't combine them.
What?
Please don't combine it in the motion.
Okay.
I would have to,
So the motion would be just specific to mayoral ad hoc.
but, but. I
Well,
would-
the mayor
I
and the
would- I would
council are
strongly-
taking action. The
I
mayor.
agree 100% with your objective. I strongly disagree with the methodology, because I don't think we can do do justice to a topic this big with this many moving pieces without really an independent academic review. Because basically, there are so, really, if you look at the zoning map, the period that UNS studied, the first 20 years, essentially, things were basically pretty much stayed as they were. In the last 30 years, that's completely turned around. We've got urban sprawl, we've got suburban sprawl, small, we've actually had a decrease in population. And so what actions or lack of action in that 30 years led to this and allowed it to happen? Until we identify those, what occurred and why, we can't make constructive, long-range decisions. And essentially, 90 days isn't going to give us that information.
No, I think the 90 days, and I don't disagree with you at all, and I love that stuff, and to me, that's what one of these moving part groups should do. Like, that to me should come out, the number one thing on our work groups, then identify the need and how to do exactly what you said. But to me, that's an implementation. I'm just trying to stop the horses at the moment. So,
Well,
If I add more-
if the 90 days is to allow input from the planning board of this group, then great.
yeah, well, it's, these groups identified and others, because again, our work group, I'm gonna call it, the farming work group, may come back immediately just based on the statement you just made. You just made a significant statement that I think any reasonable Auburn resident, A, would want to hear, B, would understand, and 3, would say, what's our next step? It's, we bring it back to simple. So I don't want to tell them in our motion, you have to do this. But I would think that our committee, that's going to be the first thing we're going to say.
I misunderstood.
Yeah, so the pause is to halt voting, action like that, to allow time to gather information, to communicate with others and each other, to educate and inform the public, and to ensure that we have a compilation of the data that's available in one place for residents and people to go to. Like the study you just mentioned, the Farmington study back 30 years ago, right, that's not readily easily available for somebody to go look, because I tried after you mentioned it the first time. And, that's what you bring. I mean, you know this. The city doesn't have those records. So that's my purpose of my motion is to cause a pause in voting or action while you do these other markers.
And so we just don't recommend a time limit on that pause, we just recommend a pause.
Well, I would recommend a pause of at least 90 days.
Minimum?
Because again, we've got a lot of stuff to do and all those moving, that 90 days is not going to be a lot of time, particularly when you think 30 of them are during a holiday.
Would you be willing to include in your motion to specifically name the planning board and basically to allow, name those and other groups?
Yep.
And so by
That they be
basically,
solicited.
you'd identified 2 groups that were originally named.
Well, and I guess I'd expand that, so I would put the planning board, the pause is to collaborate, get information, exchange data, planning board, conservation commission, city council, former ag study group, current mayor's ad hoc, and any interested community organization that wants to come forward and discuss it. That would, I'm more encompassing than those two.
Oh, good, we've got another committee, huh?
Well, we don't know. I mean, where is the, again, for lack of, again, my age, 4-H, where is the soil conservation district in this? There are some county agricultural activities. Surely Grange has some interest in this. I'm sure no one's reached out to them. So I just wouldn't limit it. I would identify those 3 or 4 and then any other community organization that has an interest in this information.
So I have reached out to many of these groups, and they are all interested. They are looking more now for direction.
Yeah. See, the work's already being done.
Yeah.
That's how fast this is done.
So with this kind of,
If we
Motion
put,
creating-
my thoughts are, if we put this motion in
Yeah.
supporting that, a motion of sorts here, to slow things down, to let them know that we do not support a vote at this time.
right, that's the other, that's actually.
That allows us a minimum of 90 days. We get the rest of these groups more time to look at that, and within those 90 days, we can come up with another plan if we had to. By then, hopefully, we've got more resources on board, we've had more time to look at this data, to pull this stuff together, to have more conversation.
Well, you know, we've had good
That's
discussion.
reasonable, 90 days is very
John's had the benefit of the discussion. Could we basically leave it in her hands to develop the wording that she
Oh, yeah.
looking for?
Yeah, that's why I said in the motion, could we just include this, but I agree with you. The actual final vote narrative that will be in the letter and go to the world, as long as you include all these elements, I think that the chair is more than capable of doing.
Who would-
So I'll move, based on all the things we've talked about, that, and use the video to get all the wording I just did, that the chair handle this issue as we've discussed with the various elements.
And I will second.
All in favor?
Now, just so we're not just telling people what to do and not doing it ourselves, you know, we need to make sure this is on our next agendas. And maybe what we can also do is consider, unfortunately I'm away, otherwise I'd volunteer now, but I'm away at least for the 30 days of the next 60, that we maybe look at organizing and hosting some community conversations that we can promote. Much like, Jordan, you brought the,
I was gonna say, is there anyone we would wanna bring in of the community or any other experts or, I mean, obviously it would be open to anyone, but is there like a key speaker maybe we would wanna have?
you see,
I don't know if it's as relatable in this
If,
sense, but.
I have a note myself here. If, I would hope that you consider inviting Stephanie Gilbert to either our January or February meeting. Basically, she's from the State Department, and essentially she focuses on the area that we're discussing right now, and I think she'd be an excellent resource, and we could host an open meeting similar to one that we had in UND.
no,
Yeah.
that's what I'd like
Do
to
the same
see us
thing,
do
have
is,
Stephanie come.
yeah.
Okay.
Have you reached out to Stephanie? Do we have her contacts?
You've had that information, don't you, Norris?
Wonderful.
So, Professor Grumbling was kind of more of a presentation on this end, like a lecture? Would it be more that, or would it be just kind of like a roundtable discussion?
I think it needs a little thought that maybe we can't do tonight. One is talking to this person and seeing what way we communicate. And maybe it's a combination of, I just went to one of the Muskie Institute where they had 3 or 4 people who did 5 to 8 minutes, again, total time is what I mean. And then they opened it up and had a moderated panel that went both ways. The panelists spoke some, and then the audience had a chance to ask questions, which then the panelists took. It also brings forward, if we're talking about this, I'm glad we have a first one and somebody that will generate interest in the community. But maybe the second or a later one focuses on even people within this community that, so at 60-day mark, the various groups will know. Because one, very early on, when somebody said something about the watershed and that, I immediately thought of, she's no longer with us, but we have some, Lynn Richards, in the Best Practices Act that the Watershed Protection Commission has really been focused on for 3 years, having to do with farming and animals.
Because they pollute the water.
Because they
the most.
pollute the water. And what was, I've learned a lot, and they did a great job on changing practices, helping people. Most people wouldn't realize, I kind of think, I want to say it's a horse issue, manure, that they really worked at, cleaned up the problem, helped educate the owner, provide some assistance that it couldn't have been done without. And now, moves forward and, it's added great protection to the drinking water. We've got a better resident business, whatever that was, and everybody's become a little more knowledgeable. So I think we've got a bunch of people in our community like that. I just don't know what they are, but as soon as somebody here talked about the watershed, I said, oh, that person needs to come and speak to her. So maybe
Not
I
in your head, how many other contacts have you made?
So
Some
it's-
tools in a tool belt. That's
Just
good.
compliments.
That's good.
So I think we've got enough to move forward
Yep.
with this. I don't want to hold up everyone, so unless there's more.
But you feel comfortable, Jordan, you got it
I
all
do,
in our
yeah, I
meeting?
do.
So I've got a quick question before we move on. So, the mayor's ad hoc committee, is that all being recorded and available to the
Mhm.
public? In your strategic committee people?
It will be. So the first one, I don't believe we had taped because we're at the Hilton and there's like 185 people floating in all these different work groups. So starting Thursday, you will have growth and quality. We'll both be meeting at the same time, but in
So
separate
we own
rooms.
2 cameras.
So, I mean, I don't know, each
Well,
subcommittee has chairs.
Well, then I want to make a motion that we, the conservation, request or require, whatever's the strongest word you can use, that all these meetings
Yeah.
be video recorded and available to the public,
Yeah.
and available easily to the public. In fact, if it's important enough, we should have copies at the library. It's easy now. We'll start now with go online and find it, because they could go to the library and use them.
You can always ask Liz about
But,
that.
but
Yeah,
there
but I
should be the
think-
expectation that these
Or
are
strategic.
public. That's my problem.
And I don't think it is the expectation, because remember, the strategic planning committee is mostly city officials. They are taping and recording all that. See, now you have these work groups and,
But this is what happened in
Yeah.
the 2010 comprehensive plan. I saw records, city didn't have them, found them from individual members. They had these community meetings, there were no records
Mhm.
kept. All these decisions were made, and then when the vote came, there were people voting on the comp plan that weren't even residents of Auburn, that as soon as the plan was approved, made some money out of the deal. I want to prevent that. There is no reason why the city of Auburn cannot conduct business in public. We own at least 2 of those. Tony does a great job every meeting. We have it here, that's portable. We have a room in there, and if all else fails, I bet our friends in Lewiston would let us use one of their rooms every quarter.
I know, I hear it all the time, and I always say, well, we always tape our conservation.
But again, how easy is it to find? That's our next educational.
Before we adjourn, I would appreciate acting on 7D if you possibly could, basically because I would like to see authorization for our chair to reach out to the council for permission to contact and hopefully develop academic contacts.
Do we need,
And I would so move.
or can we just do that?
Huh?
Well, do we need to vote or approve that, or can we just do that?
No, I suspect we should have council authorization, because essentially it wouldn't involve any dollars, but basically we should have their authorization for the staff to provide access to information and that sort of thing.
Okay,
with the
fair enough, fair
academic.
enough. Because then it might take city time. It might be a little
So
bit of
I just
cost
want to,
involved.
Mr. Keenan, I support this because I know that it's important. If I don't fully understand, what the objections would be to others, I trust it. But can we be clear on who it is? So is it we, the Conservation Commission, are looking for support to reach out to higher educations? Or is it we, the Conservation Commission, that requests of the City Council to reach out to higher education institutions?
I would say we
Allow us to.
request permission, to the Conservation Commission to reach out.
Okay, see, I think we already have that authority, and I don't want to ask permission for something we already have authority to, because it's their opportunity to diminish the authority and scope, and to say no.
Not.
I would say in the
Well,
interest
but
of
if-
time and clarifying, I'd like to table this just because I feel like I don't know what I'm expected to be asking of these educational institutions. you know, I don't know the scope or who to contact, so I think that's like a whole nother discussion that we might be able to have.
I
in
figured that,
January.
though. I figured we wouldn't do that. He's just asking for step one, I thought.
Okay,
Not step 2 and 3,
Okay.
which is what you're, because we can't do anything till we decide.
right.
It would be basically obtain the council permission, and then we essentially could be, and, you know, decide ourselves, but we need their authorization to,
I'm really concerned. Tell me why, because I don't understand why we need council authority at this point. We're not asking for money, and at this point, we're not asking for staffing.
yeah,
We're just reaching out.
but you're asking enough, requesting enough staff time to basically allow the academic institution to access, you know, access the records, and probably the staff could produce them and work with them.
And I, as an Auburn resident, don't have that authority to see those records now?
But they wouldn't be an Auburn resident.
Right. But under the Freedom of Information Act, they
No,
wouldn't have.
well, if you have any questions, you know, we could,
I guess that's where I'm
What-
very concerned of asking permission to do something we already have the authority to do. So I would vote that we, the Conservation Commission, map out a plan for us to reach out to a higher education institute to perform a study on our zoning from 1980 to present, modeling the other. And that's be our motion passed, and that in the coming month, she outlines what she just talked about. How are we going to do that? Do we need council resources such as staffing or money for that? But that we're asking them for specifics, not permission.
You know, the reason I'm concerned about time, essentially, if you look at the academic
Calendar,
side of
yeah.
things, essentially, they're making their plans for next semester
Yep,
right now.
yep.
If we wait a whole month, we're really lost half a year.
Right.
I'd argue that they're probably not planning for the next semester right now, they probably have that all planned out. I think now would be a good time to reach out for the next academic year,
Yeah, fine.
but, yeah, and then which would give us, you know, enough time if we start the ball rolling now,
Yeah.
so, yeah, I appreciate
And
it.
that would be another reason for no
Francis,
permission.
Pardon me?
When Francis came from Bates,
Mm-hmm.
he did say that they are still putting their plans together for his students for January. So really, there is still opportunity. It's, I guess, what we were thinking.
And that's all the
I
more
was-
reason not to ask permission to do something we have the authority to do, because if we have to get permission from the city council, you're talking about 30 days, but we're not gonna jump ahead on the schedule. I mean, and so we're talking at least 30 days. If we make the decision tonight that we want to accomplish this, the how and the details can be left for the chair to take care of during the month and
Well,
whatever she feels.
we can do it in parallel, then, basically. We can start, but basically, you know, make plans for a formal request at our next meeting.
To the chair. I will vote against asking permission. If you can split that, you get one on one side, but I don't feel I need to ask permission at this time. I'll ask for money, I'll ask for resources where we define them, but I won't ask them permission to do it.
Just contact outside resources.
To do this, we have the authority to reach out to higher education institutions to find out about performing a study on Auburn zoning for Pleasant, hoping that it will model the UFM study.
I would agree that until we're asking for money or resources, we don't need to be asking city council. Because there's nothing set, we're not proposing anything, we're
Right.
opening up the door to communication.
And then if they come back and say, well, yeah, but we need
Well, you know,
access to
you know,
the
let's-
city records,
Let's
then we
communicate
could.
then, and we'll work on details in
Yeah.
our next meeting.
Right, and that way we don't lose time, because that means we can start on this right away. And if Jordan reaches out, because it sounds like Bates is an example, and Bates says, oh yeah, we have this address and we need A, B, C, D, E from the city, then our next meeting is we want A, B, C, D. That's my. Did you need a motion on that though? Because this first part of his motion, I second. Yeah.
I said I wasn't gonna talk about it.
Why did you say you weren't gonna talk?
Well, I didn't. Now, we already know that Mary Sylvester, last meeting, got up and said you need to have Stephanie Gilbert come to your next, one of these meetings, MAGARBs. We're gonna be doing, you're gonna be doing the same thing, going after Stephanie Gilbert.
If nobody else will, I think we're trying to support that
If we
continues.
certainly do support
Yeah.
that idea, but that's been, I think, one of the problems, is we've had groups working for the same thing, duplicating each
Yeah.
other, and it hasn't focused into an organization that really is communicating.
Well, that's the benefit of the stopping a vote right now, because one group doesn't know what the other group is doing.
Yeah.
And you're right, if they're already bringing it, if some of these other groups are bringing it, all we'll do is say, how can we help?
Yeah, it makes conservation look like they don't know what they're doing, and they maybe didn't hear that story, but yeah, that was part of it.
Yeah,
Well,
no,
the other part of it too, Bill, was that our chair of the mayor's ad hoc committee said he had had enough, he'd heard enough facts.
Mhm.
He
He
didn't
did say
need to
that.
hear more.
And there is verbiage too on that camera. So it didn't sound like the intention was to pursue getting her opinion or anybody else's. I think having our now little work group going that we can continue to support and we'll be on the same page. So we can have Mr. Keene still bringing that back to the table,
because us too.
coordinating with Stephanie for either getting that information to you and or coming to here or whatever, so that we're not redundantly asking the same people for the same type of things too.
Well, we can have Stephanie come, whether,
And we can all be-
regardless where we are,
Yeah.
on the ad hoc thing,
Yeah.
essentially. If we can make arrangements and hopefully at our next meeting, which would be what, the third,
Third Tuesday.
Tuesday, January.
What day is that?
And, but,
15th of January.
and that can occur regardless of what occurred
Definitely.
elsewhere. I agree with.
You wanna invite her to the
with-
next meeting?
With Kathy and Bill, that there will be, a real sense of urgency for ad hoc to, complete at our next meeting, and, I'm not opposed to addressing that issue.
Good. In fact, since we've got our work groups and we've got our desire to bring people and they have an interest in the community, there's no reason why that couldn't be arranged, even taking the 15th as in lieu of our meeting.
And you know, if other people have an interest in what the ad hoc committee may be discussing on the 18th, I'd encourage them to attend.
Yep.
Well, okay, yeah, I asked my professor like 3 months in advance, so he had plenty of time prepared to speak in front of a crowd. So I wouldn't feel comfortable asking someone to come and give like a public presentation, but to maybe sit in at one of our meetings
Okay.
and provide discussion. But yeah, I just feel like it wouldn't be fair to someone going to the holidays.
Right, but if they've already, but yeah, I'm more interested in keeping it moving.
Right.
Keeping it moving, so whatever works in not taxing the same resource twice, reach out and say, it can be hosted by every group that wants to. And Mr. Keene's on all of those, so he's our conduit, so that even this, when you reach out, if he has found a list of resources we need, he can be ready in January.
What am I asking her to talk about though? I feel like there's a lot of, yeah.
She knows what she's talking about.
Right, but what
She
I-
gives these
But the topic-
presentations a
the
lot.
topic-
Right, what would I be asking her to present on? I just
I don't
want
know,
to make
so
sure
I
I'm.
can't answer the question.
Right.
She's been following the Ag Zone discussion, so I'm sure she's comfortable saying what she wants to talk about.
Okay.
I would reach out and ask what her thoughts are,
Right.
and then I would also suggest if she has no forms about any of that or suggestions, I would suggest, I guess me personally, I am very interested if she give us some raw thoughts and data on what is the worth of that ag zone as is without touching it. I think it's the most important thing we need to know is, before we do anything, what is the worth? What is the worth to Auburn as far as environmental potential in the future, global warming, the offsetting carbon, water, all those things that we have for Raleigh. could start with that.
Now, there's a parallel in forestry. There's an outreach forester in forestry. And he doesn't like to get involved in municipal town politics.
Yeah.
But they do the same thing, farming, agriculture, that's too.
Okay.
Do they give education
Yeah.
presentations? So
And
do-
Forest Products Council does too. There's a lot of support out there for just what we're talking about.
So that could be another one
Well,
of our,
that could be our next, February.
Yeah,
yeah.
yep, seriously.
And that is 74% of the audience.
That's
Yeah.
what there was where I was going, yeah, that I had them in reverse or whatever.
Forestry, yeah. That would be wonderful. It's a great idea.
We can try. Would there
When I
be?
get back, I'd like to help them with the actual task of the meetings and stuff like that.
Mhm.
I'm just not that until our meeting on the 15th.
Right, okay.
And there's no
Well,
schools.
there is a lot of stuff I've been assigned to tonight.
I know,
I'll
You
right?
can
try and get
delegate.
it
Now,
all done.
remember though, you
Right.
can delegate. We give it to you to do whatever you like with it, so feel free
Right.
to pass
Okay.
it back.
Well, I want to make sure that the most pressing issues are done. Scheduling guest appearance is important, but
Not as important
not
as
as
that first
important
vote.
as getting the letter done and
Yeah.
getting these, all of our minutes still need to be approved. So I will do what I can, delegate what I can't, but in the interest of time, I do want to move on to our other related topics like the annual report and our minutes. So you're welcome to stay for the remainder of the meeting, but I think we're going to switch gears now. Just finish up the rest of our monthly business. I really appreciate you coming. Hope you come to more. It's been a very great discussion, but
So you're looking for a motion on the annual report?
yes,
Okay,
I want to
so-
get that submitted before the
See if
end
I
of
can
the
get this
year.
right. I move that we accept the annual report as presented with minor clerical edits that she has provided and a clarification, which may be as simple as removing the segment that said Lewiston Auburn Community Forest Board to say, see their attachment. And we'll leave it to her as to which way it goes. Whether she puts a summary in from the Forest Board or she takes it out and attaches. And with those two changes from the last edition, I move we have our chair sign it and send it off.
I second. All in favor?
Now, the minutes I have a hard time because I tried to find them through my emails, but I couldn't. And of course, they're not public posted to the website because they're
Right.
draft. So another way that sometimes happens for future, not past, is draft minutes that we're going to vote on can be part of the agenda packet.
Mm-hmm, okay. Yeah, I
Because I
emailed them all
couldn't find them,
together,
right.
and I didn't resubmit the agenda packet.
No,
because
that's
it
what's okay. I
changed.
just couldn't find them, so
Okay.
I'll be happy to support other people's, but.
Can I also just make one comment before I go? For the record, we have been holding Wednesday evening meetings at the shop, 6 PM, for the purpose of just creating conversations on any matter that may come up. Very informal. So if anybody would like to come, Horses and Farm Market, it's at my little shop out back, and it will be every Wednesday for, who knows how long.
And can't get the, so if people don't know what Horses and Farm Market is.
Number
what's
9 3rd Street in the beautiful village of downtown New Auburn.
I'll put that on our agenda.
But that
so
is,
when it's
that's gonna be
published,
for the next time.
And we're really.
And next 90 days, yeah.
That was very constructive.
Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you for coming.
All right, so are we gonna hold off on the minutes?
No, I move
Sharon.
that we accept the minutes as presented with two changes, both are corrections to her name.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know how I do that. I think I'm a little.
You're fine.
in all fairness.
Then they need a signature at the bottom respectfully submitted, so they'll know who wrote it.
Yep. I guess I second. All in favor? Great. Okay, and with that, I think we can
I
adjourn.
move that we adjourn.
I second.
All in favor? Okay, thank you so much.
And we do have, right, two openings, or one opening.
One over.
One opening.
Yes,
Yeah, one of-
Shelley.
Right, but we have 2 on Forest Board.
We have up to 3 on Forest Board because there's a member